Welcome. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASI. And thank you. This is episode number 52. Now, in today's episode, we have a few things to get into. Of course, we're going to recap last week's March Madness, and then we're going to jump into my predictions for the Final Four on both the men's and women's side. And then we're going to finish off this episode with the top 5 and worst 5 NBA rankings as of April 1st. So let's get into it. So to start, in terms of the March Madness recap from last weekend. So if you recall, last weekend was the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games for both the men's and women's tournament. Now, I made my predictions based on who was in the Sweet 16 about which teams I thought would make it to the Final Four. And overall, I would say I did okay. Out of the 8 teams that made it to the Final Four, I predicted 5 of them to get there. Now, breaking it down on each side, on the women's side, I correctly got 3 out of the 4 correct. The actual Final Four teams are going to be UCLA versus UConn, and then South Carolina versus Texas. So UCLA, UConn, and South Carolina were the 3 that I picked to make it to the Final Four. Texas was the one that I didn't. I had Notre Dame, but they lost in their Sweet 16 matchup to TCU. So 1 wrong, no big deal. And definitely looking forward to those Final Four matchups. I think all 4 teams are great, and all 4 teams are capable of winning it all. And I will give you my actual predictions in just a little bit. Now, on the men's side, I ended up with 2 of the 4 teams correct. The final 4 teams that made it on the men's side, we have Florida versus Auburn, and then Houston versus Duke. So Florida and Houston were the 2 teams that I got correct. Auburn and Duke were the teams that I got incorrect. I thought it was going to be Ole Miss and Alabama, so I was wrong there. I'd say the most shocking of those wins was Alabama. I really thought that their explosive offense was going to be able to continue to be explosive, but Duke did a great job against them and held them to one of their lowest point totals that they've had in a long time. So that's why they made it to the Final Four. Now, all in all, in terms of all 8 Final Four teams, 7 of them are number 1 seeds, and there's only one number 2 seed, which is UConn on the women's side, which some might argue that the only reason that they made it is because USC was without their best player in Juju Watkins. So we literally could have had all number 1 seeds on both sides if it wasn't for that injury. But even the fact that we have 7 1s and 1 number 2 just kind of speaks to the point that I talked about in last week's episode in regards to it being more chalk heavy and the top tier teams being easily defined as the best teams. And they've proven it, and that's why we have what we have now in this Final Four this year. Now, going into my predictions for the Final Four. Now, on the women's side, I am going to pick South Carolina to make it to the finals, and I'm predicting UCLA to make it to the finals. I think that South Carolina is just going to beat Texas off of pure experience, between coaching and just player experience. They are the reigning defending champions. I feel like they feel poised to repeat, even though they lost a lot of talent from last year to this year. They still have explosive players all over the place, and even when they were down in their last game, they showed that determination and that grit to crawl back and take the lead from Duke and pull out the win. So I think that's going to be more of the same against Texas. And then in regards to UCLA versus UConn, if I was being honest, I prefer for UConn to make it because I feel like UConn versus South Carolina is like a bigger draw. It's more box office. You get, the school that is known for being the most dominant in women's college basketball, UConn, versus the school that is currently in that position with South Carolina. So it's like a literal pass the torch situation. But basing it off of just being objective, I do think that UCLA will get the win over UConn, mainly because of their size. I think that Betts is going to have her way inside, and I feel like they'll be able to just match up better against UConn and pull off the win. So in the finals, I do have South Carolina and UCLA, and I am predicting that South Carolina will get the win over UCLA, getting the win and becoming the back-to-back champs in the women's tournament for the first time since UConn did it. So that's my prediction in terms of the women's side. Now on the men's side, I am predicting that Florida will beat Auburn. Now, in my original prediction for the Final Four, I had three SEC teams making it to the Final Four. In this case, it only ended up being two of them, only being two teams, and but that does, for the SEC's sake, does mean that they're guaranteed to get at least one SEC team in the championship. Considering that people were trying to go back and forth about, well, is the SEC overrated? They got 14 teams in the tournament. I mean, if you get 14 teams in a tournament, you end up with 7 of the last 16, and you end up with 2 out of the last 4, and guarantee 1 out of the last 2. I think it's pretty safe to say that they deserved what they got and to be recognized as the best conference in college basketball right now. So, with that being said, I do think that both teams have shown the ability to be the number one team in the country throughout the year. They've gone back and forth, but at the end of the day, it's about the momentum of who's been carrying the torch most recently. And I think Florida, with their win streak, has proven that they were the best team in the SEC, and they've proven it out of the gate also. Yes, they've had some tough matchups during the tournament, more so than the other three teams, but I think it's just a product of the teams that they've matched up against. And I think that them being tested will actually benefit them, and they will be able to make it to the finals. And then in the other game, I have Houston pulling the upset against Duke. And this one, kind of similarly to what I mentioned in the UCLA matchup, it's about matchups. I think that Duke has been the most dominant team in the men's tournament so far, but I think they've done it a lot from just being able to explode offensively. And Houston is arguably the best defensive team in college basketball, and I think that's where the matchup favors Houston. I think that, Duke definitely has, if you line up just player for player, Duke probably has the better players. Obviously, they have arguably the best player in college in Cooper Flag. But I think that overall, Houston's team defense, the way they help and then help the helper, and they always seem to be in the right spot and able to force teams into the shots that they don't want to take, able to force teams to move the ball in the ways they weren't trying to. I think this will play a role, and I think Houston pulls off the upset against Duke and makes it to the final championship game. And then in the championship game, I have Florida beating Houston. I think this is going to be a tough matchup. I think that you get a really explosive offense versus a really explosive defense. But unlike the Duke versus Houston matchup, I think that Houston will not be able to control Florida's mix of firepower. And I think that Florida, having been more battle tested throughout the year, will pull off the win and take it home for the SEC and get the championship. All right, now to finish off the episode, I'm going to get into my top 5 and worst 5 NBA rankings as of April 1st. So for these rankings, just like it is every single time, if I say as of April 1st, that means it does include the games that finished on April 1st. So you could also look at it being as the morning of April 2nd. However you want to look at it, April 1st games do count in the rankings, in the records, and how I decided to align them. So let's hop right into it. Of course, coming in at number 1, we got to stick with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They definitely deserve to be number 1. They have the best record in the league right now. Their current record is 63-12. So not only do they have the best record in the league right now, they also have the longest current win streak. They have won 10 games in a row. So obviously they're 10 for 10 in their last 10 games, which is kind of the metric that I'm using in all of these teams that I'm ranking in the top 5 and bottom 5. They've won 10 straight. They've beaten good teams. They are all back healthy now, and they've been clicking on all cylinders. Shea has been explosive game after game, averaging well over 30 easily. I've said it pretty much all season that he deserves to be MVP. I know Jokic has been putting up some great stat lines, but I just think based on the overall productivity of the team, how much they are so far ahead of everyone else, not only do they have the best record, but they also clinched home court advantage throughout the entire Western Conference playoffs already, even if they were to lose all the rest of their games. So they're clearly the best team, not only just in their conference, but in the league as a whole, and they deserve to be at the number 1 spot. Now coming in at number 2, I got to go with the Boston Celtics. Celtics are currently 56-19. They have the second longest win streak right now with 9 wins in a row. So they are 9-1 in the last 10 games. And on top of that, they had won 5 other games outside of their last 10. So in their last 15 games, they're 14-1. And that only loss that they had in that 15 game stretch was to OKC, who is the number 1 team. So Boston is clicking at the right time. They're showing that, championship pedigree that they have and peaking at the right time as they head into the playoffs, which is a problem for everybody in the Eastern Conference for sure. Now coming in at number 3, I'm still going to stick with the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavaliers have dropped a little bit. They're currently 60-15. They're only 5-5 in their last 10 games. So they've been up and down, as 5-5 would indicate. But they're still holding on to the top seed. As of right now, they have a 4-game lead on Boston for the number 1 seed. I think each team has about 6 or 7 games left. So the likelihood is that they'll maintain the lead. I don't think that they'll give up the entire lead in just that short amount of time. I don't think they'll lose enough games for Boston to catch them. But the way the momentum's going, with Boston peaking at the right time and Cleveland kind of stumbling through the finish line, even if Cleveland remains at the number 1 seed and Boston at number 2, I think most people would pick Boston to beat Cleveland in a 7-game series if they were to match up in the conference finals. So we'll see how it plays out, but I do feel like Cleveland deserves to at least remain at the number 3 spot, even, and with the second best record in the league right now, even though they've been stumbling in their last 10 games. Now coming in at number 4, this one was tough. I went back and forth with like 4 teams that could have landed in this 4 and 5 spot, and really digging into what these teams have done since the last rankings. I had to actually go with the Los Angeles Lakers. So as surprising as it sounds, I still think the Lakers deserve to be in the 4th spot in this top 5. They had a lull where they lost a few games back to back. LeBron was out for some games with an injury. Then he came back. In his first couple of games that he was back, they lost. So, it took them a minute to kind of get back into action, but they showed with their most recent win against Houston, that what they could do when they put it all together. The combination of Luka and LeBron means that they can always be a threat to any given team in any given series. So right now, I believe they're sitting in the 4th seed in the West, which I know they probably want to do everything they can to make it into the 3 seed or 2 seed, because then that means that they wouldn't have to match up against OKC until the conference finals. Whereas if they stay in the 4 and they beat the 4-5 matchup, they would then play OKC in the second round, which I think OKC would win fairly easily. The Lakers are currently 46-29, and they are 6-4 in their last 10 games. Now, lastly, bringing in the 5th spot, I'm going with the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets are 47-29. They are 5-5 in their last 10. They just had a very tough loss last night in double overtime. To me, I think it was a little bogus. Russell Westbrook was called for a foul on a three as time expired. But if you actually look at the play, Westbrook actually jumped to the side of the shooter, and that the shooter finished his shot. He just fell to make it look like there was contact when really there was no contact, especially not that would have altered the flight of the ball in any way, shape, or form. He didn't land on him. He didn't land under him. He literally went to the side. And as he was shooting, the shooter decided, oh, I'm going to try to fall into him. And they gave him the foul, which I think was pretty bogus. So, tough loss for them to have. I think in that game, Joker had a 61-point triple-double, which was the first time ever. So, as I mentioned earlier, he's been putting up great stats. He definitely deserves to be NBA All-First Team, and he deserves to be second in the MVP race. But part of your MVP candidacy has to do with the production of the team, which is why I don't think that he should overtake SGA for the win this year. Now to finish off with the worst five rankings. Now with these worst five, mainly because these worst five have essentially been in this worst five for so long. If you've watched all the previous episodes, if you've watched the other top 5 and worst 5 rankings, you've heard me go into detail about why these teams are here. So I'm really just going to kind of blast through these in order with a little tidbit about each one, nothing more, so we can move on. Because honestly, all 5 of these teams are just terrible, and that's that. So coming in at 26, we're going to go with the New Orleans Pelicans. The New Orleans Pelicans are 21-54. They are 4-6 in their last 10 games. They've already sat their stars, saying that they're going to have surgery. CJ McCollum's out and Zion Williamson is out. So their season is over. They knew it was over. They've already been eliminated from playoff contention. So now it's just, okay, let's see what we can do to get the most ping pong balls for the draft. Coming in at number 27, I'm going with the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets are 19-56. They are 3-7 in their last 10. They also ruled out their star, LaMelo Ball, who's going to be missing the rest of the season. I think he's also supposed to be getting surgery. So, again, positioning just to get more balls for the lottery. At number 28, I'm going with the Washington Wizards. The Wizards are 16-59. They have lost 3 straight, and they are 2-8 in their last 10. So if you recall from the last ranking, they had moved up from 30. I think they moved all the way up to 27. Now they kind of settled back to where they should be. They dropped 1 spot. They're down to 28 as of right now. Then coming in at number 29, we have the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz have the worst record in the entire league. They are 16-60. They have lost 6 straight, and they are 1-9 in their last 10 games. Again, another team that's been at the bottom. The only reason that they moved up from the very last spot to this spot is because the team that's in last spot has completely fell apart recently, and they have less reason that they should have fallen apart this much. So, bringing in the rear at number 30, I'm going with the Philadelphia 76ers. As I mentioned in the previous episode, they're the most disappointing NBA team of the entire season. They're in contention with the Phoenix Suns, who are also look like they're going to miss the play-in tournament, which is terrible. But considering all the hoopla and the fact that they're in a weaker conference, if you would have told 76er fans that they would have missed the play-in and been one of the worst 5 teams in the league, I don't think anybody would have believed it. So, for that reason, they deserve to be at 30. They do have a record of 23-53, but they've lost 9 straight games, and they're 1-9 in their last 10. So, this is where they belong, last place at the rank number 30. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.